Hello, my name is Dominte and I am a second-year student at the Faculty of Letters, which is part of Alexandru Ioan Cuza University from Iași, Romania.
Hello, my name is Andre. I study at the Faculty of Letters at Alexandru Ioan Cuza University, and I am passionate about Shakespeare's work. His plays have been one of the greatest discoveries of the last 2 years.
Hello, my name is Darius Brashov. I'm 20 years old, and I study English and Comparative Literature at the Faculty of Letters in Iași.
Hello, my name is Ioana Danielescu and I'm a second-year undergrad student at the Faculty of Letters in Iași.
A parallel can be drawn between Shakespeare and today's great film directors such as Steven Spielberg, who use cutting-edge computer-generated imagery in order to stun their audience. This duality between the written word and the representation on stage shows us that Shakespeare did not primarily think of himself as a writer, but as a complete theater man.
I studied some of the plays written by William Shakespeare last year during the English classes, and I was surprised to discover that he never went to the university, yet he was a bright observer of the realities of his time, and he was able to masterfully render them into his works.
This might sound shocking to some of you, but I never really expected him to want to become an actor. There's no denying that playwrights will get emotionally attached to their works, but I cannot imagine what kind of raw self-flagellation he had in mind when he decided to play the role of Hamlet's father. Maybe this was his final goodbye to the lost son, or maybe he just couldn't imagine having somebody else play his own role, that is, the role of a real-life father, but also the role of arguably the most personal character he was going to create. However, what truly gets me in this story is the fact that it portrays a completely different image of this legendary bard. This isn't about Shakespeare being huge, about him being a titan in literature. This is about the man Shakespeare saying, "Hold my pen. I'm about to show you what a father is."
My favorite play is King Lear because of the multiple keys in which it can be read. The intergenerational conflict between an old father and his 3 daughters, the thin balance between power and authority that makes Lear confound Cordelia's love for him as a father with the disrespect for his position as king. The image of the storm outside reflected in the old man's soul. All these made me reflect more on the trials to which our own families are subjected nowadays, with old parents needing attention and younger members learning to adapt and differentiate between appearance and essence.
I'll definitely have to say Hamlet. And one of the main reasons why I have a solid connection with it is because Hamlet was the first Shakespearean play I myself chose to read. Prior to that, it had all been about the canonical analysis of Romeo and Juliet, which, don't get me wrong, I still hold in high regard. It's just that I needed a more personal approach to Shakespeare's work. Needless to say, I fell in love with Hamlet, and the one true experience that took my appreciation to a whole nother level was reading James Joyce's Ulysses, especially the library scene. It made me realize that comparative literature can be a bliss because it adds so many layers of complexity to the relationship between Shakespeare and Hamlet. So melting the relationship between Stephen Dedalus and Polly Bloom into the relationship between father and son, but also between this legendary writer and this scapegoated filial persona, is not just a resplendent moment in literature, but also one of the greatest achievements in modernism. Oh, and have I mentioned I'm a huge fan of David Tennant's? Well, his Hamlet soliloquy clearly made me treasure his work even more.
My favorite play has to be Midsummer Night's Dream, for two very big reasons. First of all, because I am an avid and unashamed consumer of what I can only describe as feel-good literature. I can appreciate well-built tension and sadness, and I can definitely appreciate tragedies and dramas. However, sometimes, considering everything in the world is so incredibly dramatic and sad nowadays, I like to give myself a moment to sit back and to allow myself to be amused and entertained, which is why I often prefer comedies. At this point, I have read The Midsummer Night's Dream too many times to be surprised by anything that happens. I consider that a good thing. It gives me a sense of comfort. Which brings me to my second big reason. I am somewhat sentimental and nostalgic about this play because I still remember the first time I came into contact with it, long before I could speak English and more than a decade before I became familiar with Shakespeare's literary universe. It was integrated into one of my favorite cartoons at the time and poorly translated but entertaining as ever. I don't really have a lot of memories from when I was a child, but I vividly remember the poorly constructed donkey head and the little kid who definitely did not want to be Puck. They arguably didn't do a lot of justice to Shakespeare and his work, but I think the show had the essential elements that Shakespeare would have wanted it to have. It was fun, it was chaotic, and it made me laugh. And I think it's incredible that a 6-year-old girl from Romania who didn't understand a stitch of English and who thought that Europe was just slightly bigger than her neighborhood could meet and fall in love with Shakespeare. I find it even more incredible that 14 years later, after dedicating so much of my life to studying the subtleties of the English language and to understanding the history and evolution of English literature, I find myself enjoying A Midsummer Night's Dream just as much as I did back then.
I definitely think Shakespeare should still be taught to young people. Shakespeare speaks about universally human values that, despite the passing of time and the changes in social order and technology, still remain important to humanity. Obviously, young people find some difficulties in reading Shakespeare, first of all at the linguistic level, but also in what regards the historical content of his works. However, I don't think Shakespeare should be marginalized in today's educational system. Shakespeare is at the basis of the Western canon. To make a small reference to Harold Bloom, he is considered by many to be the greatest writer the Western tradition has produced, and it is important for the formation of a humanist to read Shakespeare. There is a lot to learn from Shakespeare's work. He is an essential part of the reading an aspiring philologist has to do. And I believe that Shakespeare is not at all incompatible with the taste of young people. There is an intensity of feeling in Shakespeare's work, an intensity of the contrasts created by the author, an intensity of the portrayal of love and hate and passion that can be quite appealing to young people who are defined by the intensity of feeling. So I believe that Shakespeare, despite the different historical context that his works refer to, is still highly relevant, especially because of the intensity of feeling and of the universality of the themes he portrays.
When my mom was just a bit younger than I am right now, communist censorship and control were still the norm in Romania. She saw Othello and became so obsessed with theater that she scoured every bookstore in our city and bought one of the very first foreign books she'd ever had, a collection of Shakespeare's works. Back then, she had to buy it alongside a collection of propaganda pamphlets, and it was quite possibly a very rare find. Years later, I read King Lear from the same exact book for my medieval literature seminar, and found it was very different from the Anthony Hopkins movie adaptation. We then offered it to my younger cousin, who had to read Romeo and Juliet for his high school literature class, but he hates reading, so he preferred the manga version. Are you noticing a pattern? My mom, my cousin, and I, though part of different generations, were all taught about Shakespeare as a nucleus of universal literature. His influence penetrated the Iron Curtain. It radiated over so much of the literature that followed it, that in Romania, he's not only a mandatory read for literature courses in university, but for high school courses too. Most importantly, within just a few minutes, I managed to mention about 5 different formats that Shakespeare can be enjoyed in nowadays. And that's what I think makes his work relevant so many years later. It's delightfully unlimited versatility. Shakespeare can be performed on Broadway as well as on a kids' show. His characters can be painted or turned into cartoons or transported into completely different eras, and they continue to feel real, important, and worthy of empathy or hatred or love. Sure, some may not care for the importance of William Shakespeare as a catalyst for the evolution of universal literature, but every single person I know enjoys quality entertainment. Whatever you think that means for you, I can almost guarantee that Shakespeare's work can snake its way into that shape for you. And I think it's obvious that art which is so well constructed that it preserves its value in almost any format deserves to be discovered by the younger generations too.